In this small Ohio town, everyone knew Mike Carter as the diner owner who never missed a shift.
Mike Carter.
Today, he was about to lose the only his daughter.
Judge Eleanor Voss had sat on this bench for 20 years, and in that time she had grown to believe one dangerous thing, that Every morning before sunrise, Mike opened the diner alone. Every afternoon, Emma did her homework on the last stool by the register. It was not much, but a single complaint. One misunderstanding twisted into something far worse. And now, a judge who had already made up her mind held
Mike Carter had exactly 11 minutes before the courtroom doors would open, and in those 11 minutes, he was going to lose everything he had spent 8 years building. If you have ever loved someone so much that the thought of losing them made it hard to breathe, stay with this story until the end, because what happens inside that courtroom is going to remind you why some people fight even when the whole world has already decided they will lose. And if stories like this move you, hit that like button and subscribe, because there is so much more heart waiting for you on this channel. Mike sat on the hard wooden bench outside Family Courtroom 3, turning a folded piece of paper over in his fingers. It was a drawing Emma had made for him 2 nights ago, 2 stick figures holding hands in front of a building labeled Our Dinner, misspelled in purple crayon, with a bright yellow sun overhead. He had looked at that drawing so many times the crease was starting to tear. 8 years earlier, Mike's wife had left in the middle of the night, taking nothing but a suitcase and leaving behind a 6-month-old baby girl and a mountain of unanswered questions. He never chased her. He never badmouthed her to Emma, not once. Not even on the hardest nights when Emma cried for a mother who was never coming back. He simply did what needed to be done. He took over his father's failing diner on the edge of Maple Hollow, worked 18-hour days, learned how to braid hair from grainy internet videos at 2 in the morning, and built a life for his daughter out of flour, coffee grounds, and stubborn love. Mike's corner diner was not much to look at. A squat brick building with a flickering neon sign and booths that had been reupholstered more times than anyone could count. But it was the heartbeat of the town. Truckers stopped there before dawn. Retired teachers held their book club in the back corner every Thursday, and every single day after school, Emma sat on the last stool by the register doing her homework, swinging her legs, occasionally sneaking a fry from the basket her father pretended not to notice. People in Maple Hollow respected Mike, but respect and belief are not always the same thing. There were whispers the kind small towns are famous for, whispers about how a man alone could not possibly raise a little girl right, whispers that grew louder 6 weeks ago, when Emma fell from the diner's back step while chasing a stray cat and broke her wrist. It was an accident, plain and simple, the kind that happens to every child who has ever run too fast down a set of stairs. But an anonymous call to Child Protective Services turned that accident into an allegation of neglect, and that allegation turned into a courtroom summons that had been sitting on Mike's kitchen table for 3 weeks, staring at him every single morning like a verdict already written. The bailiff called his name, and Mike rose from the bench, tucking Emma's drawing carefully back into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than the hallway. Marble floors, tall windows, a flag standing rigid beside the judge's bench. Mike had never been inside a courtroom before in his life, and every part of it seemed designed to remind him how small he was. He took his seat at the defendant's table, alone, because he could not afford a lawyer, and the public defender assigned to him, a tired young man named Daniel Reyes, had met him for the very first time only 20 minutes earlier in the hallway. At the front of the room, behind an elevated bench, sat Judge Eleanor Voss. Judge Voss had presided over Maple Hollow's family court for 2 decades, and in that time she had developed a reputation of her own, sharp, exacting, and famously unsympathetic toward single fathers who came before her. It was not something she said aloud, not something written into any official record, but everyone who practiced law in that courthouse knew it. Judge Voss did not trust men to raise daughters alone. She had seen too many cases, she often said, where fathers meant well and still failed. She had her reasons she kept locked away where no attorney, no colleague, and certainly no defendant standing before her would ever be allowed to see. She opened Mike's file without looking up. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice flat and clipped, "you are here today because your daughter suffered a physical injury while under your unsupervised care, and a formal complaint alleges a pattern of neglect. The state is petitioning for emergency removal, pending a full custody review." Mike's stomach dropped. Emergency removal. The words landed like stones. Across the room near a side door, he could see Emma through the small rectangular window, sitting beside a kind-faced social worker named Miss Patterson, swinging her legs the way she always did at the diner counter, except now her small face was pinched with confusion instead of comfort. Your Honor, Daniel Reyes said, standing beside Mike. The injury in question was a documented accident. Mr. Carter took his daughter to urgent care within the hour. There is no history of neglect. Mr. Carter runs a business, coaches her reading at home every night, and by every teacher's account, Emma is a happy, healthy, thriving child. The opposing attorney, a sharp-suited woman representing the county, rose smoothly. Your Honor, the anonymous complaint also alleges that Mr. Carter frequently leaves his daughter unsupervised at his place of business for extended periods while attending to customers. Mike wanted to stand up and explain that Emma was never unsupervised, that the entire diner watched over her like 100 extra sets of eyes, that Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery next door checked on her during the lunch rush, that old Pete the mechanic walked her to the school bus stop every single morning, rain or shine. But Daniel gently placed a hand on his arm, a silent reminder that in this room, Mike did not get to simply speak his truth. He had to wait for permission. Judge Voss listened, her expression unreadable, flipping through pages of the file with the practiced efficiency of someone who had made this exact decision 100 times before. And as she read, Mike watched her face, searching for even the faintest flicker of doubt, and finding none. She had already decided. He could feel it in the way her pen hovered over the order sitting at the corner of her desk. The court finds sufficient concern, Judge Voss began, her voice steady and final, to grant temporary emergency placement of the minor child with. And then she stopped. Her eyes had drifted, almost involuntarily, to a photograph clipped inside the case file, a photo the social worker had included showing Emma's bedroom at Mike's house. It was a small room, modest, painted a soft yellow, shelves lined with secondhand books, a hand-sewn quilt on the bed, and on the wall, a growth chart drawn in marker, tracking Emma's height every single year since she was 2 years old, right beside a row of ribbons from the school reading fair. Something about that image struck Judge Voss in a place she rarely let anyone see. Her own daughter, Claire, had grown up in a house very much like that one, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs after Eleanor's husband walked out. Eleanor's own mother, who had also once stood in front of a judge, decades earlier, in a courtroom that decided she was unfit simply because she was alone. Eleanor remembered sitting in the hallway as a child, just like Emma was sitting now, terrified that a stranger in a black robe would decide her whole life. Judge Voss set down her pen. The courtroom fell silent, sensing the shift before anyone understood it. She looked up, not at the attorneys, but directly at Mike. Mr. Carter, she said slowly, tell me about the growth chart on your daughter's wall. Mike blinked, caught entirely off guard. It's just something I started when she was 2. I mark her height every birthday. She likes to see how much she's grown. Some years it's barely an inch, and she gets so mad about it. A small, involuntary smile crossed his face despite everything. Judge Voss studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to Miss Patterson, the social worker. Has this home been formally inspected beyond the initial report? Briefly, Your Honor. It appeared clean, stable, and age-appropriate. I want a full home study conducted this week, Judge Voss said. Not a formality, a real one. I want statements from the child's teachers, from neighbors, from anyone who has observed this child's day-to-day life. And I want to hear directly from the child herself in chambers with appropriate support present. The county attorney shifted uneasily. Your Honor, the standard protocol in an emergency removal case is immediate placement, pending review. I am aware of the standard protocol, Judge Voss said, an edge returning to her voice, though this time it was not aimed at Mike. I am also aware that standard protocol exists to protect children, not to punish fathers for the crime of raising them alone. This court will proceed carefully, not hastily. Over the following days, Maple Hollow watched the story unfold in the particular way small towns do, quietly, through grocery store conversations and church pews, but with real weight behind every word. Miss Patterson visited the diner and watched Emma do her homework at the counter while regulars checked in on her between orders. She interviewed Emma's second-grade teacher, who spoke of a curious, well-adjusted child who read above grade level and never once seemed neglected. She spoke to Mrs. Alvarez, to old Pete, to the school nurse who had treated Emma's wrist and confirmed Mike had followed every instruction to the letter. And in a small, quiet room down the hall from the courtroom, Judge Voss sat across from Emma. No robe, no bench. Just a woman and a little girl and a plate of animal crackers between them. Do you like living with your dad? Judge Voss asked gently. Emma nodded immediately, without hesitation. He makes my hair like the girls on TV now. He watched 100 videos to learn. And he lets me help make pancakes on Sundays, but only the easy part because I'm not allowed near the stove yet. She paused, her small face growing serious. Are you going to take me away from him? Judge Voss felt something tighten in her chest, an old, familiar ache she had spent 30 years trying to bury beneath robes and rulings. "No," she said quietly, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. "No, I don't believe I am." 1 week later, the courtroom was full again, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Mike stood at the defendant's table, Daniel Reyes beside him, and for the first time since this ordeal began, he allowed himself the smallest flicker of hope. Judge Voss looked out over the room, and when she spoke, her voice carried none of the coldness from the first hearing. Having reviewed the complete home study, the statements of teachers, neighbors, and medical professionals, and having spoken directly with the minor child, this court finds no evidence of neglect. What this court finds instead is a father who has built a stable, loving, and remarkably well-supported home for his daughter, often with far fewer resources than this court usually sees in stronger custody cases. The petition for removal is denied in full. The room exhaled all at once. Mike's knees nearly buckled with relief, and across the room, Emma broke away from Miss Patterson and ran straight into his arms, her small hands gripping the fabric of his shirt like she never intended to let go. But Judge Voss was not finished. "Mr. Carter," she said, and Mike looked up, startled by the gentleness in her tone. "I owe you an honesty I do not often offer from this bench. I came into this case with assumptions I should not have carried. I let old wounds of my own color my judgment before I ever heard your story. That was a failure on my part, and I intend to make sure it does not happen again, not in my courtroom, and not to the next father who stands where you stood today." In the months that followed, Judge Voss quietly championed a new review protocol for the county, one that required documented evidence and full home studies before any emergency removal could proceed, specifically to prevent families from losing their children over rumor and assumption alone. Mike never sought recognition for any of it. He went back to flipping pancakes before sunrise, to braiding hair from grainy tutorials, to marking Emma's height on the wall every birthday, 1 inch closer to grown. But every so often, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, a woman in a plain gray coat would slip into a back booth at Mike's corner diner, order a black coffee, and watch a little girl doing her homework on the last stool by the register, swinging her legs, safe and unafraid. And Judge Eleanor Voss would allow herself, just for a moment, to believe that sometimes the system could still be saved. One father, one daughter, and one honest second chance at a time.